Hello, my name's Ian Scales and you're watching TelecomTV's Alternative Agenda. This time out, I'm talking to Usman Haque of Cosm. So Usman, why is Cosm different?
Cosm is different in three specific ways, I'd say. And the first and possibly most important is that it's just so much easier to get started than almost any other M2M or Internet of Things platform out there. A lot of the other services require you to perhaps phone up, download an SDK, have some kind of arrangement with the platform, probably read through a lot of documentation before you can even get going. With Cosm, you can sign up on the website. You never even have to contact us. It uses a standard RESTful API. It's essentially built almost like a web service, which many developers are already familiar with. And it uses standard ways to update data, to request data, and what have you. And so you can get going really in 5 minutes. If you have a little bit of technical knowledge, you can start to build applications or even design your firmware for your hardware within a few minutes. And we often have engineers actually, sort of exclaim that, they actually manage to be productive that very afternoon, which is I think one of the key things for us, because when I first launched the platform a few years ago, the aim was just to make this as easy as possible so that people could start to innovate as quickly as possible so that they could de-risk their innovations, they could de-risk their entry into the market and what have you. The second thing that I think is quite different is that we put quite a lot of emphasis on what we refer to and others refer to as time series data. That means we're not just about sending instructions to devices or requesting information from devices at a specific moment in time, but we're actually storing every single data point we ever receive from any device. Now, what this means is that you can actually start to do historical analytics. You can compare what's happening now in this device to the history of another device. This is actually quite a tough technical challenge to store data over time, and we've pretty much cracked it. In this kind of new world of connected devices, I see a lot of the growth coming from being able to share, maybe not make public, but to share somehow, possibly securely with trusted third parties or with other organizations, or in some cases with your customers, to share that data in real time.
It's really like stream exchange or social M2M.
We've had, actually for almost 20 or 30 years, we've had connected devices in one form or another. They might have been oil pipeline monitors, or they might have been some kind of energy monitor. And this is largely what the M2M industry has looked at, the idea of machine-to-machine connection. And historically, the kinds of systems that were built for that kind of requirement operated on a kind of one-to-one basis. In other words, there was one device pushing to one back-end infrastructure or one database, and generally consumed maybe by one customer or one company or what have you. And in almost all cases, that was a sort of closed data set. When it came time to make that data available somehow to some other organization, it was actually quite difficult. But what it did give the companies that created such things, it did give them a sort of security and a control over everything. Now, in the Internet of Things world, and this is where I make a distinction. Others also make this distinction, but this is not necessarily, I should say, the accepted distinction. For me, the distinction of the Internet of Things world is that there is a kind of an openness of a sort of cracking open of those data silos. There's a situation where actually you might deploy a bunch of devices, sensors, products of some sort, where you might have actually created it for a particular purpose, but the real value might actually come from someone else helping to extract that value from your product. And a classic example might be you might have delivered some kind of fitness product that is measuring something about someone's fitness. If the data is open to application developers, somebody else might actually be able to create an analytical tool that makes your product even more valuable. And so to that end, yes, this idea of the kind of social Internet of Things becomes a very important one, where you have devices that are connecting to a network that may be actually accessed by more than one person or more than one company, but also where the devices themselves can make decisions about something actuate or not to actuate, or to publish this data or some other bit of data, based not on a single instruction coming from head office, or not from a single instruction coming from an individual consumer, but might actually be able to look at the state of a whole bunch of other devices or other data streams. There might be an energy monitoring and triggering device, basically something that can switch things on and off, that looks at the weather in order to determine whether to switch something off, or that looks at the usage of power by all the other devices in the network to determine whether or not it's efficient.
So what sort of partnership arrangements do you envisage Cosm having?
In one sense, because we are, we're quite early in the industry, we're open to almost any exploration, in the sense that we are still trying to understand the market, I think, as a lot of other people are. And there may be some things that make more sense than others and that might actually become more obvious further down the line. However, I can say that at the moment, as far as we see, the thing that's absolutely crucial is to be able to provide a managed service, which essentially means that we provide this kind of managed backend. That means that a manufacturer or product developer or what have you actually doesn't need to worry about infrastructure at all. It's important for us to make it as frictionless as possible to get on the platform. So just to start prototyping, even to build stuff as an individual, it's totally free. If you are working perhaps just on your own, or maybe even just a very small team with just a few devices, that's, we'd love to support that and see it happen and see the kind of innovations that come about. If you're operating at scale, which means that you've got 1,000 devices or 10,000 or let's say 1 million devices, then there's certain things that you require, for example, provisioning, upgrading firmware, managing all the customers who are using those devices. Those are the things that we provide as a commercial service.
At this stage, what sort of applications do you envisage being the most popular?
Well, I'm really excited by all the stuff that is coming out of the Kickstarter movement at the moment, where what we see are small teams, sometimes individuals, sometimes slightly larger businesses, building these really innovative products that are physical devices that connect to the web somehow. And there's a range of these that are coming out. For example, there was a recent one which was basically an RGB light bulb that could be connected to any Cosm data stream so that it effectively becomes a kind of real-world notification that you set up how you want. The stuff that I'm most interested myself is stuff where the end user has an ability to configure it to do what they want, to write a recipe, if you like, for that product. And so it's really exciting. This year it seems to be the turning point where suddenly a lot of people are building a lot of different things and trying to crack a lot of different problems.
So how long before we see a lot of deployment in the IoT space, and what are some of the blockages that you can see? What
we're seeing at the moment is quite a few different infrastructures being built. And a lot of them are proprietary, and they actually use very specific data formats that might be very good for a certain situation, but not for another one. Our focus at Cosm is to try and build something that's actually quite generalized, that's built on existing web standards, that's built on the same kind of tools that people are already familiar with. At the moment, with all these sort of different backends with different APIs, I think that could be a problem in terms of scaling out. So I would be looking to find ways to have more broad standard adoption. That doesn't mean that everyone has to use exactly the same system and exactly the same data format, because actually in the web there are a number of initiatives that aim to sort of unite, in some cases, very different data formats or protocols. But it does mean a sort of an acceptance of, if you like, a kind of approach or a methodology for describing these devices, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Now, one of the clues to a way to do that is stuff we're seeing in the development of what's called the semantic web, where you can start to link things to each other and say that this entity or this attribute is the same as this attribute. And so you can call it that, you can call it Celsius and you can call it Fahrenheit, and let's just know that there's a conversion factor between them. So they're not terribly complex ways to make this kind of cross adoption more manageable. But that's something I'd like to see more of.
Usman, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me.